Good afternoon, students. The lecture topic is Introduction to Medical and Clinical Genetics, Heredity and Pathology, Classification and Semiotics of Hereditary Disorders. How do we diagnose it? In some cases, people are proud of the fact that they look alike their parents. In some cases, they rather forget about it. However, there is no doubt that genes are what they are. So what if we will look closer? How important genetics is in our everyday life? It is boundlessly important. We can change much, but we have no power to change genes. Impact of genetics on health and disease. It is estimated that 3 to 7% of the general population will be diagnosed with a recognized genetic disorder. This does not include common disorders such as cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and psychiatric disorders. All diseases or medical conditions have a genetic component, except trauma. Understanding how variations in an individual's DNA may affect disease and health is the focus of genomic medicine. This knowledge can lead to innovative ways to diagnose disease, earlier detection. By identifying genetic predisposition to a particular disease, new approaches to treatment, development of designer drugs that target a mutation or its products, pharmacogenomics. Common terms in medical genetics. Genetics is the study of genes and their effects. Genomics is the study not just of single genes but of the functions and interactions of many genes in the genome. Medical genetics is any application of genetic principles to medical practice. This includes studies of inheritance, mapping disease genes, diagnosis and treatment, and genetic counseling. Pharmacogenetics is the study of how drugs affect the body with respect to specific genetic backgrounds. Knowledge of these effects can improve effectiveness of drugs and minimize side effects on an individual patient basis. A genotype is an individual's collection of genes. The term also can refer to the two alleles inherited for a particular gene. The genotype is expressed when the information encoded in the gene's DNA is used to make protein and RNA molecules. The expression of the genotype contributes to the individual's observable traits, called the phenotype. However, medical genetics deals with such questions as how heredity affects homeostasis and how it determines health, how important are hereditary factors in etiology, what is the ratio of environmental and hereditary factors in pathogenesis of illnesses and disorders, does body constitution impact healing and recovery, how heredity affects drugs and medication usage for every individual patient. Clinical genetics is the medical specialty which provides a diagnostic service and genetic counseling for individuals or families with, or at risk of, conditions which may have a genetic basis. Clinical genetics manages diagnosing, therapy, inherited conditions prediction and prevention. Nowadays, clinical genetics based on genomics, cytogenetics, biochemical genetics, immunology, and other subfield of genetics. As you see, medical genetics is fundamental knowledge that any doctor has to know. Even a dentist. Because we will be involved in the process of diagnosing and treating patients having hereditary disorders. A dentist has to know manifestations of inherited conditions. Because as soon as we diagnose the condition, we will start the treatment. It means that this affects the prognosis and therapy. According to OMIM, nowadays, there are more than 13,000 inherited features, 50% of which are parts of inherited conditions and birth defects. In Crimea, 1 of 800 newborns is born with a cleft lip, cleft of the alveolar process of the maxilla and cleft soft and hard palates. In the clinic, we manage patients with anhydrotic ectodermal dysplasia, syndrome de Stanton-Capdepone, and other inherited pathology. It is obvious that without basic knowledge of genetics it is impossible to manage not only inherited conditions but also multifactorial diseases with inherited predisposition. The problem of caries is more global than we used to think. It is less dental nor hygienic issue than a comprehensive medical and genetical challenge. Holzinger's indicator proves that appearing of caries is 80% genetically conditioned. It means that all the other inner and outer reasons impact appearing of caries only in 20% of the time. In 30% of the time, dental anomaly is inherited. A great example that history gave us is the House of Habsburgs. They all had a massive, gigantic mandibula that have been exposed to the whole world for centuries. So, heredity and genetic diversity, variability, variation are the reasons why evolution have taken place on the Earth. Heredity is the passing of traits from parent to offspring. Molecules of DNA carry information that codes for various proteins. These proteins interact with the environment, causing observable patterns of life. The complex mechanisms that replicate and reproduce DNA and the organisms it creates can be recombined and mutated during the process, leading to new and various forms of life. All organisms, from the simplest bacteria to the largest eukaryotes, use DNA as the main form of heredity. Genetic diversity, biology definition, the sum of various alleles within a species or a population. Genetic diversity refers to both the vast numbers of different species as well as the diversity within a species. Genetic diversity, variability, and variation. To further understand genetic diversity, let us define related terms. Genetic variability is defined as the ability of a population to produce organisms with different genotypes. How about genetic variation? What is it? Genetic variation is defined as the presence of a various number of alleles with different distribution frequencies in a certain population. Genetic variation simply refers to the variation of genomes at the individual level, i.e., between individuals, or at the species level, i.e., between species populations. The variation may result from a mutation. Mutations may cause the emergence of mutants or variants. Apart from mutation, other mechanisms leading to genetic variation are sexual reproduction and genetic drift. Conversely, the term genetic diversity expresses the extent of that variation. It attempts to find the answer to the question, how diverse. Genetic drift describes random fluctuations in the numbers of gene variants in a population. Genetic drift takes place when the occurrence of variant forms of a gene, called alleles, increases and decreases by chance over time. These variations in the presence of alleles are measured as changes in allele frequencies. Why is genetic diversity important? Genetic diversity is important because it could ensure that certain groups of individuals, species, or populations will be able to adapt to certain environmental factors. We separate phenotypic and genetic variations. Mutation is a permanent, heritable change in the nucleotide sequence or the process by which such a change occurs in a gene or in a chromosome. There are two major types of mutations. Small scale and large scale. Small scale mutations are genetic mutations, often in the form of substitutions, deletions, and insertions of one or more nucleotides. Mutations occurring in certain regions of chromosomes are large-scale mutations. This form of mutation can be lethal or result in serious conditions or syndromes. There are biological, chemical and physical reasons of mutations. The biological ones are viruses, bacteria, ferments, etc. The chemical ones are foreign DNA and RNA. Analogues of nitrogen-containing bases of the nucleic acids, pesticides, some medications and biopolymers. The physical reasons are ionizing radiation, radioactive elements, UV, high-frequency current, high and low temperatures. The main part of inherited diseases pathogenesis is the mutation. There are three factors, which influences on the pathogenesis: the individual's genotype, what part of the genome was damaged, the impact of the external environment. A genetic disorder is a health problem caused by one or more abnormalities in the genome. It can be caused by a mutation in a single gene, monogenic, or multiple genes, polygenic, or by a chromosomal abnormality, is a missing, extra, or irregular portion of chromosomal DNA. The mutation responsible can occur spontaneously before embryonic development, a de novo mutation. Or it can be inherited from two parents who are carriers of a faulty gene, autosomal recessive inheritance, or from a parent with the disorder, autosomal dominant inheritance. When the genetic disorder is inherited from one or both parents, it is also classified as a hereditary disease. Some disorders are caused by a mutation on the X chromosome and have X-linked inheritance. Very few disorders are inherited on the Y chromosome or mitochondrial DNA. That means we have 5 ways to inherit such a disease. 1. Autosomal recessive inheritance. 2. Autosomal dominant inheritance. 3. X-linked inheritance. 4. Are inherited on the Y chromosome. 5. Are inherited on the mitochondrial DNA. Classically, genetic point of view suggests diseases to be monogenic, digenic, etc., oligogenic, polygenic, multifactorial, complex, or chromosomal. This classification is based on either hypothetical or known nature of genetic defects underlying diseases. In total, the designation of genetic diseases is monogenic. Polygenic, multifactorial or chromosomal superficially indicates possible or known genetic cause without reflecting the etiology as a whole. Since etiology comprises the multilateral evaluation of how a disease can be classified, defined, and discovered. Clinical cases. Marfan's syndrome is one of the most common autosomal dominant inherited disorders of connective tissue. The incidence of Marfan syndrome is approximately 1 in 5,000 worldwide. Most of who get the disorder passed on from their family. However, in about 25% of people diagnosed with Marfan syndrome, nobody else in the family is affected. The disease is due to a new random mutation in the FBN1 gene. These latter cases are more severely affected. Individuals with Marfan syndrome are usually tall and slender, have elongated fingers and toes, arachnodactyly, and have an arm span that exceeds their body height. Other common features include a long and narrow face, crowded teeth, an abnormal curvature of the spine, scoliosis or kyphosis, and either a sunken chest, pectus excavatum, or a protruding chest, pectus carinatum. Down syndrome is a genetic disorder caused when abnormal cell division results in an extra full or partial copy of chromosome 21. This extra genetic material causes the developmental changes and physical features of Down syndrome. Down syndrome varies in severity among individuals, causing lifelong intellectual disability and developmental delays. It's the most common genetic chromosomal disorder and cause of learning disabilities in children. It also commonly causes other medical abnormalities, including heart and gastrointestinal disorders. Children and adults with Down syndrome have distinct facial features. Though not all people with Down syndrome have the same features, some of the more common features include flattened face, small head, short neck, protruding tongue, upward slanting eyelids, palpebral fissures, unusually shaped or small ears, poor muscle tone, excessive flexibility, short height. Semiotics is the analysis and interpretation of signs and the basis of medicine since antiquity. Medical semiotics is a field of medical science that deals with signs and symptoms of illnesses and pathology. However, speaking of semiotics of inherited diseases, we will notice some common features. These common features are family history. Some members of the patient's family can also have the same disease as the patient. Nevertheless, if the family members do not have this disease, it doesn't mean the diagnosis is wrong. Specific symptomatic marker, such as gray strand of hair, coarse facial features in a child, disproportionate physique, peculiar behavior, intolerance to certain foods, complete absence of teeth, anomaly of their shape, structure, neonatal, supernumerary teeth. For example, the Sturge-Weber syndrome have a typical manifestation, a huge facial hemangioma. If we meet at the clinic a tall and slender man, with disproportionately long arms, legs and fingers, breastbone that protrudes outward or dips inward and a high, arched palate and crowded teeth, we can make a hypothesis about this man having Marfan's syndrome. Genetic heterogeneous. We can deal with the same clinical symptoms but have different diagnoses. For example, a cleft palate is a symptom for more than 800 inherited conditions with different types of heredity.